The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 22nd chapter. The Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one. For you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The Gospel of the Lord. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my spirit be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Every good American Christian, upon hearing this Bible story, automatically thinks, "Oh, I know what this is about. This is about the separation of church and state." It does not matter that such a concept definitely did not exist in Jesus' day. That probably does not even occur to us. We have been so influenced almost without realizing it by our modern day American context and what politics and religion look like in that context, that we apply those same meanings to Jesus. We have to temporarily remove ourselves from our own context in order to understand what Jesus is actually saying. The first thing we need to consider about this story is that the Pharisees and the Herodians are working together. The Pharisees and the Herodians are not exactly what you would call friends. One group, the Herodians, stand for those with power in the Roman state, the Roman soldiers who oppress their Jewish subjects. The other group, the Pharisees, are religious leaders for the Jewish people. These groups of people would not normally work together, but they are united by their dislike of Jesus, who causes trouble for both of them alike. This would be like the Democrats and the Republicans getting together to trick a mutually hated opponent. And perhaps that comparison does not really even do it justice. This is not a group of liberals and a group of conservatives who are both actually fairly moderate. This is more like a union between extremists of opposite sides. Some socialist hippies having a meeting with a right-wing militia and plotting to take down the same person. That is not very likely, but that is a modern-day equivalent of the Herodians and the Pharisees coming together. For a gospel that we usually hear as though it is talking about the separation of church and state, this is already very political. Both the Pharisees and the Herodians are trying to get Jesus to fall into a political trap. Jesus, of course, does not fall for it. He knows immediately what they are trying to do. It looks like there is no right answer to their question. If he says it is not lawful to pay taxes to the emperor, the Herodians will say, "Aha!" And Jesus is caught and arrested for failing to pay his taxes and encouraging others to do the same. But if he says it is lawful, the Pharisees can say, "Aha! Jesus pays taxes to the emperor, whom the Romans worship as a god. Jesus is claiming that the emperor is a god worthy of worship, and that is blasphemy." Jesus is very clever with his answer. The emperor's face is on the coin. It belongs to the emperor. It is right to give it to him. But your faith practices do not belong to the emperor, so continue to worship God as you usually do. He answers in such a way that neither the Pharisees nor the Herodians can say, "Aha!" But even though Jesus does not fall into the political trap that the Pharisees and the Herodians set for him, 2,000 years later, we misconstrue Jesus' words and march right into the trap obliviously. Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. We like this. It sounds like Jesus is drawing a nice imaginary line right down the middle of our lives, a separation of church and state line. On Sunday mornings, we belong to God at least for an hour or two. We will gladly give that time for worship to God. But on weekdays, we switch and we belong to our bosses and our teachers and our families, and we must give that time to our work, to earn the modern day equivalents of the coin that Jesus asked to see. On weeknights, perhaps we belong to our televisions, which we purchased with those coins that we earned. Or perhaps we belong to our sports teams or social clubs. On election days, we belong to our nation, and we imagine that our vote does not have anything to do with our faith. We dare not cross that imaginary line. And this is our favorite part, those coins that we earn. Well, Jesus says right here, right in the Bible, that those do not belong to God. When we think of this passage as separation of church and state, what we are really thinking about is control. We will gladly let God control our lives for a few hours on Sundays. We will even gladly let God take over in the middle of a crisis or a time of need. But usually, we would rather control our own lives, and we would especially rather control our own money. Jesus is looking at an actual coin when he answers the Pharisees and the Herodians. When I look at an actual coin today, I notice that it says a funny thing on it. In God we trust. This is funny because I don't think it's true, and for it to be engraved on a coin shows exactly how untrue it is. That engraving is just lip service. Like, great, I mentioned God. I'm glad I got that out of the way. Now I can do what I want. We trust God occasionally for some things, but we are certain that no one knows how better to earn, spend, and save our money than our own selves, and we dare not ask God for advice about it. After all, God might tell us to give it all away, and that is not what we want to hear. We like this gospel story as Americans because now we pretend to be our own Caesars. And we love the idea that parts of us can belong to God at certain times when we need them to, but the rest of the time we belong to ourselves to do what we please. But that is the trap. We are as stuck in the same web as the Pharisees and Herodians were all those years ago, even as they tried to entrap Jesus. For even though we act as though we belong to ourselves and that we are our own lords, the reality is otherwise. When we work, we might think that we are the ones in charge, earning our own money to support our families. But really, we are stuck. We must work because we must have money. When we go to school, it is so that we can get an education, so that we can get a good job, so that we can, one day, have money. When we vote, we often vote for whoever we think is going to help us, either as individuals or as a nation, get more money. Our money says, in God we trust, but the thing we really trust to solve our problems is the money itself. We are all too eager to draw an imaginary line between our faith and the rest of our lives, thinking that as long as we give to God what belongs to God, the rest is for us to do with what we please. And yet, by doing that, we admit how entrapped we are, how we have been snared by greed and would do anything to keep that imaginary line intact so that we can remain in control of our wealth, even as our wealth is really in control of us. But when we really listen to Jesus, we are led out of the trap. Jesus asks them whose image is on the coin, but another further idea is implied. The emperor's image may be on those coins, but whose image is on the emperor? Whose image is engraved on each and every Herodian and Pharisee? Whose image is engraved on each and every human being from every time and place? Whose seal is stamped on every animal from whales to ants, on the leaf of every single tree and blade of grass? In the book of Job, there is a moment when Job tries to claim he understands everything that is happening to him, and since he got himself into this mess, he will get himself out of it. And then God speaks to Job. A very sarcastic God asks him, who created the heavens and the earth? How were the boundaries made between sea and sky? Were you there? Tell me, surely you know. Of course Job doesn't know. Of course Job wasn't there. God is the one who did all of that. God's image is stamped on each of us, and God's seal is engraved on all of creation. There is no imaginary line separating our faith lives from the secular, our religious lives from our political lives. When we go to our jobs and to school, we learn and work as Christians. When we watch TV or consume other media, we do so as Christians. When we play a sport or spend time with friends, we do so as Christians. When we vote as Christians. When we earn money, we earn it as Christians. And when we spend or save it, we do that as Christians too. Everything we do in our lives, we do as children of God, named and claimed by God at our baptisms. And of course, that is what Jesus was really saying that day. That even when you pay taxes to the emperor, you're doing that as people created and loved by God, and that money is going to someone who is also created by God and is also loved by God. There is nothing outside the sphere of God's control. And that is great news for us. If God is in control of all of creation, we do not have to depend on our wealth or our own ability to earn it. We are not bound by our own abilities to succeed. If we remember that even our money belongs to God, we do not have to be so afraid of losing it or anxious to get more of it. When we first realize that if we obey Jesus' words here, we actually must give everything to God, it can feel overwhelming. But then we remember that God gave everything to us in the first place, even our very lives. Everything we have comes from God, so we can be free to give to those in need, to pay what we owe in taxes, to make our communities better, to spend wisely on things that improve our lives, and even on things that bring us joy. Everything we have comes from God, so we can be free to use our time in ways that serve God and our skills to glorify God. None of this means that we are called to give away everything we have to the poor or to stop all of our supposedly secular work. In fact, it means the opposite. There is no imaginary line dividing what parts of our lives are God's and what parts belong to ourselves. All of us and all our possessions belong to God already. God specifically calls us to live and act as Christians while we are out and about in the supposedly secular world, because that is where God already is. Martin Luther once said that the mark of a Christian shoemaker is not that they put a cross on every shoe, but that they make good shoes. In fact, God has already put the cross on both the shoemaker and the shoe. It is not up to us to do that. Instead, we are sent out with the crosses already stamped on. so that we are free to show God's love by simply living as Christians, by being little Christ in everything that we do. Amen.